The fluorescent lights flickered in the underground parking garage as three shadows closed in on their target. Lilia Chambers, CEO of Titan Core Industries, pressed her back against the cold concrete pillar, designer heels scraping against oil-stained pavement. The hitmen moved with practiced precision, one blocking the exit, two flanking her Mercedes. Her white silk blouse seemed to glow under the harsh lighting, making her an easy mark in the dim garage. But they hadn't noticed the janitor. Seth Newman had been emptying trash cans in the corner, invisible in his gray coveralls, just another face the executives never saw. His daughter's laughter still echoed in his mind from their morning goodbye. He'd promised her pancakes for dinner. Simple, safe, normal. That life was about to shatter. Because the man pushing a mop cart wasn't just a janitor, and the hands gripping that wooden handle had once belonged to someone very different. Someone dangerous. The first hitman lunged. Seth moved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The underground parking garage of the Helix Tower smelled like motor oil and stale exhaust. Seth Newman's hands moved methodically across the push broom, sweeping cigarette butts and coffee cups into neat piles. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows between the rows of luxury sedans and SUVs that belonged to people who never looked twice at the man in gray coveralls. He preferred it that way. At 36, Seth had perfected the art of invisibility. His tall frame moved with an economy of motion that suggested discipline, though most people only saw the janitorial uniform and the weathered hands gripping cleaning tools. His dark hair was cut short, practical, and his face carried the kind of lines that came from experiences he never discussed. To the executives who rushed past him each day, he was part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the concrete pillars supporting the structure above. But tonight, as Seth made his rounds through the basement level, something felt wrong. The sensation started as a prickle at the base of his skull, an old instinct he'd tried to bury along with his former life. He paused near a support column, apparently adjusting his cleaning cart, while his eyes swept the garage with practiced efficiency. 3 men had entered through the service entrance, their movements too coordinated, too purposeful. They weren't security, they weren't maintenance, and they definitely weren't supposed to be here. Seth's grip tightened on the broom handle as he watched them spread out, moving toward the executive parking spaces with tactical precision. One man positioned himself near the exit ramp, another near the stairwell entrance, while the third advanced toward the center of the garage. They were setting up a perimeter, controlling exits, creating a kill box. Professional work. The elevator chimed. Seth's attention snapped to the polished steel doors as they slid open, revealing Lilia Chambers. Even from 50 feet away, she commanded attention. Her white silk blouse and charcoal slacks were immaculate, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. At 32, she'd already built Titan Core Industries into a powerhouse, her reputation for strategic brilliance matched only by her demanding standards. She was completely unaware of the trap closing around her. Seth watched as Lilia walked toward her Mercedes, heels clicking against concrete, phone pressed to her ear. She was animated in conversation, gesturing with her free hand, utterly focused on whatever business deal she was negotiating. The hitmen began converging on her position, moving with the casual confidence of predators who'd already won. Every instinct Seth had spent 4 years suppressing suddenly roared to life. He could walk away, should walk away. This wasn't his world anymore. He'd left that life behind, traded violence and danger for the quiet stability his daughter needed. Clara depended on him. She was waiting at home right now, probably practicing her violin or reading those mystery novels she loved. Walking away was the smart choice, the safe choice. But Lilia had just reached her car, and the lead hitman was less than 10 feet behind her. Seth moved. The broom handle became an extension of his body as he closed the distance with frightening speed. His footsteps were silent, years of training ensuring he made no sound against the concrete floor. The lead hitman reached for Lilia's shoulder just as Seth's broom handle connected with the back of his knee, a precise strike that buckled the man's leg instantly. Lilia spun around, her phone clattering to the ground as she registered the scene. Her eyes went wide, shock and fear flashing across her face as she saw the man behind her crumpling to the ground, and Seth already moving past her toward the second attacker. The second hitman was faster, more prepared. He'd drawn a tactical baton and swung it toward Seth's head with lethal intent. Seth deflected the strike with the broom handle, then stepped inside the man's guard. His elbow connected with the hitman's solar plexus, a devastating blow that emptied the man's lungs and sent him stumbling backward into a parked vehicle. The third hitman abandoned his position at the exit and rushed forward, pulling what looked like a taser from his jacket. Seth didn't give him time to deploy it. He swept the man's legs with the broom handle, then drove the wooden end down onto the hitman's weapon hand. The taser skittered across the floor as the man howled in pain. 30 seconds. 3 attackers neutralized. Seth stood in the center of the chaos, breathing controlled, adrenaline singing through his veins in a way he'd almost forgotten. The broom handle rested across his shoulders now, casual, as if he'd just finished sweeping rather than defending someone's life. He turned to Lilia, who stood frozen against her Mercedes, her carefully composed executive mask shattered by shock and something else. Recognition that the invisible janitor she'd never noticed was something far more dangerous than he appeared. "Are you hurt?" Seth asked, his voice calm despite the violence that had just erupted. Lilia shook her head slowly, unable to form words as she stared at the 3 men groaning on the concrete floor. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them against her car, trying to steady herself. "We need to call security," Seth continued, already reaching for the emergency phone mounted on the nearby wall. His movements were efficient, professional, as he reported the incident with minimal detail. 3 unauthorized individuals in the executive garage. Attempted assault. Security needed immediately. As sirens began wailing in the distance, Seth turned back to Lilia. Her shock was giving way to sharp calculation, her brilliant mind already processing what had just happened and what it meant. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Seth picked up his broom, already retreating back into the shadows where he belonged. "Just the janitor, Miss Chambers." But they both knew that was a lie. Security personnel flooded the garage within minutes, followed by police cruisers with flashing lights that painted the concrete walls in alternating red and blue. Seth gave his statement with practiced brevity, describing what he'd seen and responded to while carefully omitting any details that might invite deeper questions about his background. He mentioned taking self-defense classes, acting on instinct, getting lucky. The officers seemed satisfied with the explanation, more focused on the 3 unconscious men being loaded into ambulances under police guard. Lilia watched from across the garage as detectives took her statement, her eyes repeatedly finding Seth through the chaos. He could feel her gaze, the questions forming behind those intelligent eyes. Questions he had no intention of answering. When his shift finally ended, Seth clocked out through the service entrance, avoiding the main lobby where he knew Lilia would still be dealing with police and corporate security. He drove his modest sedan through the midnight streets, his hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. The apartment was dark when he arrived. Clara's babysitter had left a note saying his daughter had finished her homework and gone to bed at 9. Seth checked on her anyway, standing in the doorway of her small bedroom, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She was 12 now, growing faster than he could quite believe. Her violin rested in its case beside her desk. Mystery novels stacked neatly on her nightstand. Safe, peaceful. Everything he'd worked for since the day his world had fallen apart. Seth closed her door quietly and moved to the kitchen, pouring himself water with hands that finally showed the slightest tremor. He'd crossed a line tonight, revealed himself in a way that could unravel the careful life he'd built. But as he stood in the darkness of his kitchen, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth the risk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The alarm clock's shrill beep cut through the darkness at 5:30 a.m. Seth's hand shot out with reflexive precision, silencing it before the second ring. Old habits. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom, mentally cataloging the day ahead. Monday meant cleaning the executive floors, restocking supplies, and the weekly maintenance check on the HVAC systems in the East Wing. Ordinary, predictable, safe. He rose and moved through his morning routine with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. Shower, dress in the gray coveralls that marked him as maintenance staff, make coffee in the small kitchen where sunlight was just beginning to filter through the window. The apartment was modest, 2 bedrooms in a working-class neighborhood called Ashwood Heights, but it was clean and paid for with honest work. Clara's door opened at 6:15, right on schedule. She emerged in her school uniform, dark hair still damp from her shower, backpack already organized for the day. She'd inherited her mother's sharp features and quick mind, along with Seth's disciplined approach to life. "Morning, Dad," she said, grabbing the orange juice from the refrigerator. "Morning, sweetheart. Quiz today?" Clara nodded, pouring juice into a glass. "Chemistry, but I've got it covered. Mrs. Patterson basically telegraphs her questions if you pay attention to what she emphasizes in class." Seth smiled, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "That's my analytical girl." They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, a ritual they'd maintained for years. Seth asked about her weekend violin practice, and Clara told him about the new piece she was learning, something complicated by Bach that required more finger dexterity than she currently possessed, but she was determined to master. "Frustration is just progress in disguise," Seth said, repeating one of his frequent reminders. Clara rolled her eyes affectionately. "I know, Dad. You've only told me that about 1,000 times." At 7:15, they drove to Westbridge Academy, the private school that consumed a significant portion of Seth's salary. Clara had earned a partial scholarship based on her academic performance, but the remaining tuition still stretched their budget tight. Seth considered it the best investment he could make. "Pick you up at 4:30, he said as Clara gathered her backpack. She paused before closing the car door, her expression suddenly more serious. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson mentioned that parent-teacher conferences are next week. Are you going to come?" "Of course. When have I ever missed one?" Clara's smile returned. "Just checking. Some of my friends' parents are always too busy with work. I wanted to make sure you remembered." After she disappeared into the school building, Seth sat in his car for an extra moment, watching students stream through the entrance. Clara never complained about their modest lifestyle or the fact that her father cleaned buildings for a living. She'd grown up understanding that honest work had dignity, that providing for family mattered more than status or wealth. but sometimes Seth wondered if she knew what he'd sacrificed to give her this stability. The career he'd abandoned, the person he'd been before everything fell apart. He pushed the thoughts aside and drove to Helix Tower, arriving at 8 a.m. for his shift. The maintenance office was already buzzing with activity as the day crew assembled. His supervisor, Vincent Hayes, was reviewing work orders on a clipboard, his weathered face showing the stress of managing a building this size. "Newman, you're on executive floors today, 3rd through 7th, and the CEO wants someone to check the air conditioning in her office. Apparently it's been running cold all weekend." Seth nodded, gathering his supplies. The executive floors meant quiet work, most of the offices empty until later in the morning. He preferred it that way, the solitude allowing him to work efficiently without the awkward interactions that came when people suddenly remembered maintenance staff existed. As he pushed his cleaning cart toward the service elevator, one of the security guards stopped him. Rodriguez had worked the building for years, a former cop with sharp eyes that missed little. "Hey, Newman, heard you had some excitement Friday night." Seth kept his expression neutral. Just wrong place, right time. Rodriguez studied him for a moment longer than comfortable. "Pretty impressive moves for a janitor. Where'd you learn to fight like that?" "Self-defense classes. Community center offers them free on weekends." It was a lie, of course. The community center did offer classes, basic techniques for personal safety. But Seth's training came from somewhere far more intensive, places where mistakes meant death rather than embarrassment. Rodriguez seemed to accept the explanation, though his eyes suggested he didn't quite believe it. "Well, the CEO's looking for you. Said she wants to personally thank the guy who saved her life." Seth's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd hoped to avoid this conversation, to let the incident fade into corporate memory while he returned to blessed invisibility. "I'm sure she's busy. No thanks necessary." "Not a request, Newman. She left specific instructions. Soon as you clock in, you report to her office." There was no avoiding it. Seth rode the elevator to the 7th floor, where Titan Core's executive suite occupied the entire level. The reception area was all glass and steel, modern design that spoke of wealth and power. The receptionist, a young woman named Kiana, looked up with a knowing smile. "Mr. Newman, Miss Chambers is expecting you. Go right in." Lilia's office commanded a corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. She stood with her back to the door, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid-fire sentences about quarterly projections and investor confidence. When she heard Seth enter, she held up one finger, indicating he should wait. Seth used the moment to observe. Her office was immaculate, everything precisely organized. Degrees from prestigious universities hung on one wall, business awards on another. But what caught his attention was a photograph on her desk, partially turned away. A family photo, perhaps, though he couldn't see the details from where he stood. Lilia ended her call and turned to face him. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she looked different from the terrified woman in the parking garage. Composed, confident, every inch the CEO who'd built an empire through strategic brilliance. But her eyes carried something new when they met his. Curiosity mixed with wariness. "Mr. Newman, thank you for coming. Ms. Chambers, you wanted to see me?" She gestured to the leather chairs near her desk. "Please sit. I won't keep you long." Seth remained standing. "I have work to do, ma'am. If this is about Friday night, no thanks are necessary. Anyone would have helped." Lilia's expression shifted slightly, something like amusement touching her lips. "We both know that's not true. Security footage shows at least 4 other people in that garage who saw what was happening and did nothing. You chose differently. She moved closer, studying him with those penetrating eyes that had probably dissected countless business opponents across negotiation tables. I've been thinking about Friday night, about how you moved, how you reacted. That wasn't luck, Mr. Newman. That was training. Extensive professional training. Seth kept his face carefully neutral. Self-defense classes. Don't insult my intelligence. I didn't build this company by accepting surface explanations. Lilia crossed her arms, her posture shifting from grateful to challenging. Those men were professionals. Hired killers, according to the police. And you dismantled them in seconds using a broom handle. So I'll ask you again. Who are you really? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Seth had spent 4 years trying to avoid. He could feel the careful walls he'd built starting to crack, the past threatening to bleed into his present. I'm a janitor, Miss Chambers. A single father trying to provide for his daughter. That's all you need to know. Lilia studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. She moved to her desk, pulling out a file folder. The police investigation revealed something interesting. Those 3 men were hired through an encrypted network that specializes in corporate espionage and executive elimination. Someone paid them a substantial sum to kidnap me, possibly kill me. She opened the folder, revealing photos and documents Seth couldn't quite read from his position. I have enemies, Mr. Newman. Competitors I've outmaneuvered. Board members I've overruled. Entire companies I've rendered obsolete through strategic acquisitions. Someone wants me removed from the board, permanently. Seth's instincts were already analyzing threats, calculating probabilities, identifying vulnerabilities before he consciously realized he was doing it. Old habits returning unbidden. That's a matter for your security team and the police, he said, forcing himself to step back mentally. My security team failed. Spectacularly. Lilia's voice carried frustration and something deeper. Vulnerability. The police are investigating, but investigations take time. Whoever hired those men will try again, probably sooner rather than later. And next time, I might not have a mysteriously skilled janitor nearby. Seth saw where this was going and shook his head before she could continue. I'm not for hire, Miss Chambers. I haven't made an offer yet. Doesn't matter. My answer is no. Lilia tilted her head, her expression shifting to something calculating. What if I told you I could triple your current salary? Provide better benefits, college fund for your daughter? My daughter doesn't need a college fund built on blood money. The words came out harsher than Seth intended, carrying weight from memories he tried to keep buried. Lilia's eyes widened slightly, recognizing she'd struck a nerve. I apologize, she said quietly, her tone softening. That was presumptuous. I don't know your situation or your past. But I am genuinely afraid, Mr. Newman, and I recognize capability when I see it. Seth moved toward the door. Hire a professional security firm. There are dozens in the city who specialize in executive protection. I did. They're starting next week. But in the meantime, I'm vulnerable. And something tells me you understand what it's like to protect someone you care about. She paused, then added, Your daughter is 12, attends Westbridge Academy. Violin lessons on Thursdays, advanced placement classes. You pick her up every day at 4:30, never late. Seth froze, his hand on the doorknob. The implicit threat was clear, even if Lilia hadn't meant it as one. She'd done research, gathered information. If she could learn these details, so could whoever wanted her dead. That sounds like a threat, Miss Chambers. It's not. It's an observation about how much information is available to someone who knows where to look. And if I can find these details in a few hours of research, imagine what a professional can find. Lilia's voice carried genuine concern now. I'm not the only one in danger, Mr. Newman. Anyone close to you becomes a target by association. Seth's jaw tightened. She was right, and they both knew it. He'd made himself visible Friday night, put himself on someone's radar. Whoever hired those hitmen would want to know who interfered with their plans. 1 week, Lilia said. Let me hire you as a security consultant for 1 week. Just until my professional team is fully operational. I'll pay you whatever you want. And I promise, no questions about your past. Seth looked back at her, seeing the fear she was trying to hide beneath her executive composure. She reminded him of someone he'd failed to protect years ago, back when protection was his actual job, rather than a one-time intervention in a parking garage. I need to think about it, he finally said. Lilia nodded, handing him a business card. My personal number. Call me by tomorrow. As Seth left her office and returned to his cleaning cart, he knew his carefully constructed life had just become infinitely more complicated. The past he'd buried was clawing its way back to the surface, and this time, it might take everything with it. That evening, as he picked up Clara from school and listened to her excited chatter about her chemistry quiz, Seth made his decision. Some threats couldn't be ignored. Some debts couldn't be left unpaid. He'd call Lilia tomorrow. But first, he needed to tell Clara their routine was about to change. After Clara fell asleep that night, Seth sat in the darkness of his living room, nursing a glass of water and staring at nothing in particular. The business card Lilia had given him sat on the coffee table, a small rectangle of expensive cardstock that represented a door he'd sworn never to open again. But doors had a way of opening whether you wanted them to or not. His mind drifted backward, against his will, to the life he'd built before Clara became his entire world. Before the gray coveralls and the broom handle. Before he learned that being invisible was the greatest gift you could give the people you loved. Seth had been 24 when he joined Sentinel Protection Group, one of the most elite private security firms in the country. They didn't advertise, didn't have a website, existed only through word of mouth among people wealthy enough to need their services. Sentinel specialized in executive protection, securing high-value targets who faced credible threats from criminals, terrorists, or corporate rivals. The training had been brutal. 6 months of intensive coursework that covered everything from hand-to-hand combat to threat assessment, evasive driving to tactical firearms. They'd broken him down and rebuilt him into something harder, sharper, capable of making life-or-death decisions in fractions of seconds. Seth had excelled. His natural discipline and quick analytical mind made him perfect for the work. By 26, he was leading protection details for Fortune 500 executives, foreign dignitaries, even a few celebrities who'd received credible death threats. The pay was extraordinary, the work challenging, and Seth had found purpose in standing between danger and the people who needed his skills. That's where he'd met Isabella. She'd been a financial consultant, brilliant with numbers and strategy, working for the same tech CEO Seth was assigned to protect during a complicated merger negotiation. They'd spent weeks together in conference rooms and secure facilities, professional distance gradually eroding into friendship. Then something deeper. Isabella had seen through his professional exterior to the person underneath. The man who quoted philosophy and loved old jazz music, who believed protection work was about preserving human potential rather than just preventing violence. She'd made him laugh during 16-hour days, challenged his assumptions, seen him as more than just the weapon standing guard. They'd married quietly after a year of dating. Seth had promised her he'd leave Sentinel eventually, transition to something safer, maybe corporate security or consulting. Isabella had said she'd wait, that she understood the work mattered to him. 2 years later, she was pregnant. Clara had been their surprise, their joy. The reason Seth finally submitted his resignation letter to Sentinel. He'd finish one last contract, bank the final payment, then transition to normal life. Consulting work, regular hours, time to be a husband and father rather than a perpetual guardian. The last contract was supposed to be simple. Protect a pharmaceutical executive named Dr. Hammond during a medical conference in Seattle. Standard threat profile, experienced team. Nothing Seth hadn't handled dozens of times before. But intelligence had been wrong. The threat wasn't an environmental activist or a corporate rival. It was Hammond's own business partner, a man named Blackwell, who'd been embezzling millions and needed Hammond dead before an upcoming audit could expose him. Blackwell had hired professionals. Real killers, not the amateurs Seth usually dealt with. They'd hit the hotel where Hammond was staying with military precision, bypassing security, neutralizing the team's perimeter guards. Seth had been in Hammond's suite when they breached, 4 armed men moving with lethal efficiency. What happened next lived in Seth's nightmares. The muzzle flashes, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the weight of bodies hitting the floor. Seth had protected Hammond, kept him alive through sheer will and violent capability. But the cost had been devastating. 2 of Seth's team members had died. Marcus, who'd been married with 3 daughters. Ethan, who'd been saving money to open a restaurant. Good men, friends, gone because intelligence failed, and Blackwell had been willing to kill anyone in his path. Seth had killed all 4 attackers. Necessary, justified. But the weight of those deaths had settled onto his shoulders like physical mass. He'd done his job, saved his client, but he'd also taken 4 lives and watched 2 friends die. The psychological evaluation afterward had been brutal. Mandatory counseling, fitness for duty assessments, all the procedures Sentinel used to determine if an operative could continue working. Seth had passed every test, received commendations, been offered promotion to senior team leader. He'd declined everything and submitted his resignation again, this time with finality Sentinel couldn't ignore. But the damage was already done. The man who came home from Seattle wasn't the same one who'd left. Isabella had seen it immediately in his eyes, in the way he couldn't sleep without checking locks and sight lines, in how he'd wake gasping from nightmares about muzzle flashes and Marcus's final words. She'd been patient, loving, supportive, suggested therapy, gave him space, held him when the nightmares got bad. Clara had been born 3 months after Seattle, and for a while, Seth had thought maybe new life could erase old death. It couldn't. He'd tried consulting work, using his expertise to assess security systems and train corporate protection teams. But every client meeting felt like standing on the edge of violence. Every risk assessment a reminder of what he'd failed to prevent. The hypervigilance that had kept him alive in the field became paranoia in civilian life. Isabella had stayed through all of it, even when Seth could barely function, even when he couldn't explain why simple things like crowded restaurants or unexpected sounds left him rigid with adrenaline. She'd believed in the man he'd been, trusted he could find his way back. Then Clara turned 3, and Isabella collapsed in the kitchen. Aneurysm. Sudden, catastrophic, unsurvivable. She was dead before the ambulance arrived, before Seth could even process what was happening. One moment she'd been laughing at Clara's attempt to help make breakfast, the next she was gone. All Seth's training, all his capability, all the violence he'd mastered to protect people meant nothing when the threat came from inside. He he couldn't fight biology, couldn't shield her from her own body's betrayal. The funeral had been small. Isabella's parents, distant and disapproving of Seth's career choices, had taken their grief back to California. A few friends from before Seattle came, offered condolences, then gradually disappeared back into their own lives. Seth had been left with a 3-year-old daughter, a head full of nightmares, and absolutely no idea how to move forward. The decision to leave everything behind had been surprisingly easy. He'd sold their house, liquidated his savings, moved to a new city where no one knew his history, found the cheapest apartment he could afford, and took the first job that would hire him without extensive background checks. Maintenance work at Helix Tower had been perfect. Simple, repetitive, beneath notice. The gray coveralls were armor against the past, the broom handle a stand-in for the weapons he'd sworn never to touch again. No one expected anything from a janitor except clean floors and empty trash cans. For 4 years it had worked. Clara had grown into a remarkable young woman, inheriting her mother's intelligence and Seth's discipline. They'd built a life together, modest but stable, free from violence and hypervigilance and the weight of impossible choices. Until Friday night, when 3 hitmen had cornered Lilia Chambers, and Seth's carefully buried instincts had erupted back to the surface. Now he sat in darkness, Lilia's business card on the table, knowing that accepting her offer meant cracking open the door to everything he'd left behind. The skills, yes, but also the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the person he'd been when violence was his profession rather than his last resort. But the alternative was worse. Whoever wanted Lilia dead would eventually connect Seth to the failed kidnapping, would research him, maybe find Clara, use her as leverage, or eliminate her as a loose end. He'd failed to protect Isabella from death. He'd failed to save Marcus and Ethan in Seattle. But he would not fail Clara. Seth picked up his phone and dialed the number on Lilia's card. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Miss Chambers, it's Seth Newman. I'll take your offer. 1 week, then you transition to professional security." "Thank you, Mr. Newman. I promise you won't regret this." Seth ended the call and sat in the darkness a moment longer, feeling the weight of his decision settling into his bones. He already regretted it. But regret was a luxury he couldn't afford when Clara's safety was at stake. Tomorrow, he'd explained to his daughter that their routine was changing, that Dad had taken a second job for a little while. She'd understand. Clara always understood. What he wouldn't tell her was that the man who'd hidden in gray coveralls for 4 years was stepping back into the light. And there was no guarantee that man could ever disappear again. Tuesday morning arrived with a kind of crisp autumn air that made the city feel alive. Seth drove Clara to Westbridge Academy as usual, but this time with a conversation that had kept him awake most of the night. "I need to talk to you about something," he said as they waited at a red light 3 blocks from her school. Clara looked up from her book, immediately attentive. She'd always been perceptive, able to read the subtle shifts in his tone that indicated serious conversations ahead. "I've taken on some additional work for the next week. It means my schedule might be a bit different. But I promise I'll still pick you up from school every day. Mrs. Patterson from next door has agreed to stay with you if I'm running late." Clara studied his face with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Is this about the woman you saved? The CEO?" Seth shouldn't have been surprised. News traveled fast, especially in a building where gossip was currency among the staff. "Yes, she's asked me to help with some security consulting while her regular team gets established." "Security consulting?" Clara repeated, testing the words. That sounds more important than fixing air conditioners. It's temporary. 1 week, then everything goes back to normal. Clara closed her book, her expression thoughtful. Dad, you know I'm 12, right? Not 6. You don't have to protect me from complicated things. The observation struck Seth with unexpected force. When had his daughter become so astute? I know you're 12, sweetheart. But some things are adult concerns, not yours to worry about. Is it dangerous? Seth considered lying, offering reassurance that would be comforting, but false. Instead, he chose honesty. It could be. That's why I'm being careful, and why Mrs. Patterson will be around more this week. Clara nodded slowly, processing this information with the same analytical approach she applied to chemistry problems and violin pieces. The CEO must trust you a lot to ask for help. That's good. Mom always said trust was the foundation of everything important. The mention of Isabella settled between them, comfortable rather than painful. They'd learned to carry her memory forward without letting it become a weight that crushed their present. Your mom was right about that, Seth said, pulling up to the school entrance. Be safe today, okay? Clara gathered her backpack and violin case, then paused before closing the door. Dad? Whatever you did before you became a janitor, whatever made you know how to fight like that, I trust you did it for the right reasons. Just like you're doing this for the right reasons now. She closed the door before Seth could respond, leaving him sitting in morning traffic with the uncomfortable realization that his daughter understood far more than he'd ever given her credit for. The transition to his new role began immediately. Lilia had arranged for Seth to maintain his maintenance position as cover, a decision that allowed him to move through the building without drawing attention while actually functioning as her personal security. His official title was Special Projects Consultant, vague enough to mean nothing to casual observers. Vincent, his maintenance supervisor, had been confused by the arrangement, but ultimately shrugged it off as executive weirdness he'd learned not to question. Seth would still handle basic maintenance requests, but his primary focus was now Lilia's safety. The first challenge was understanding her routine. Lilia operated with a kind of disciplined schedule that reminded Seth of military precision, though he immediately pushed that comparison aside. She arrived at Helix Tower every morning at 7:30, spent 2 hours reviewing reports and market analysis before her first meeting at 9:30. Then navigated a gauntlet of conference calls, investor presentations, and strategic planning sessions that rarely ended before 7:00 p.m. Seth shadowed her movements, always present but unobtrusive. In meetings, he stood near the door, apparently checking his maintenance tablet, but actually scanning faces and body language for threats. In her office, he worked on genuine repairs while maintaining situational awareness. When she moved between floors, he was 3 steps behind, tracking every person who came within proximity. The executive staff initially found his constant presence strange. Vivian's assistant, Kiana, asked pointed questions about why maintenance was suddenly so attentive to the CEO's office. The CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Edith Walsh, noticed immediately that Seth's attention wasn't on electrical outlets or air conditioning units. Ms. Chambers, Edith said during a break in a budget meeting, I couldn't help but notice your new shadow. Should the board be concerned about security issues we're not aware of? Lilia's response was smooth, practiced. Just taking precautions after last week's incident. Mr. Newman has experience in security assessment and offered to help identify any vulnerabilities in our executive floor protocols. Edith's skepticism was evident, but she didn't push further. Seth made a mental note that the CFO was observant, potentially a threat if she decided to investigate his background more thoroughly. By Wednesday afternoon, Seth had compiled a comprehensive threat assessment. He presented his findings to Lilia in her office after hours, when the executive floor had emptied and they could speak freely. "Your security has 17 significant vulnerabilities," Seth said, spreading documents across her desk. "Your assistant has access to your complete schedule and shares it with at least 3 department heads for coordination. Your car service uses the same pickup time every evening, creating a predictable pattern. Your home address is listed in multiple corporate directories, and your personal security detail doesn't start until Monday, leaving you exposed for 5 more days." Lilia studied the documents, her expression shifting from confident to concerned as she absorbed the implications. "I had no idea we were this exposed. Most people don't until someone exploits the gaps. The men who attacked you last week knew your schedule, your parking spot, your routine. That's inside information, Miss Chambers. Someone close to you provided intelligence." The accusation hung in the air between them. Lilia's hand stilled on the papers, her mind clearly racing through possibilities and implications. "You're saying someone in my company set me up. I'm saying the attack required detailed knowledge that isn't publicly available. Either someone here is actively working against you, or someone got careless with information that should be protected." Lilia rose and walked to her windows, staring out at the city as sunset painted the skyline in shades of orange and gold. When she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability Seth hadn't heard before. "I've spent 10 years building Titan Core, made hard decisions, pushed people out who couldn't keep pace, acquired companies that competed with us. I know I've made enemies." She turned back to face him. "But I never thought someone close enough to know my schedule would want me dead." Seth recognized the betrayal in her eyes. He'd felt it himself in Seattle when intelligence failures had cost Marcus and Ethan their lives, when systems he'd trusted had proved inadequate. "Trust is complicated in positions of power," he said carefully. "People have motivations you can't always see. Financial pressure, personal grudges, opportunities that seem too good to pass up. Is that what happened to you? Someone you trusted betrayed you?" The question was direct, personal, crossing the professional boundary they'd maintained. Seth considered deflecting, returning to safer conversational territory. Instead, he found himself answering honestly. "I trusted the system I worked for. Believed the intelligence, the protocols, the people in command. When that system failed, good people died. So I left, built a life where trust was simpler. Just me and my daughter. No complex systems, no room for catastrophic failure." Lilia studied him with those penetrating eyes that had built a corporate empire through reading people and situations with ruthless accuracy. "But you came back. When I asked for help, you could have said no. Could have stayed in your simple life where trust was manageable. You involved my daughter the moment you researched her school and schedule. That eliminated the option of walking away. That wasn't a threat. I know. But it was a reminder that my simple life isn't as protected as I thought. Whoever hired those men will investigate the janitor who interfered. They'll find Clara eventually. The only way to protect her is to end the threat at its source." Lilia returned to her desk, sitting heavily in her chair. For the first time since Seth had met her, she looked genuinely exhausted, the weight of running a company and facing assassination attempts finally showing through her composed exterior. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she admitted quietly. "My CFO asks too many questions. My head of operations has been acting strange since the attack. Even Kiana seems nervous around me now. Anyone could be feeding information to whoever wants me gone." Seth gathered his documents, preparing to leave. Then we trust no one except each other for the next 5 days. You maintain your normal schedule, but vary your timing by 15-minute windows I'll provide each morning. I'll screen everyone who gets within 10 feet of you. And we both sleep with one eye open until your professional security takes over Monday. That's not much of a life. It's survival. Life comes after we've eliminated the immediate threat. As Seth moved toward the door, Lilia called after him. Mr. Newman, Seth, thank you. For being honest about the risks, for not pretending this situation is less dangerous than it is. Most people try to shield me from harsh realities. You treat me like an adult who can handle the truth. Seth paused in the doorway. You built a multi-million-dollar company by facing reality head-on. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by sugarcoating threats to your life. That evening, as he helped Clara with her algebra homework, Seth's phone buzzed with a message from Lilia. Just a simple text. Edith Walsh accessed my private schedule today outside normal business hours. Thought you should know. Seth stared at the message, his instincts immediately cataloging implications. The CFO had just moved to the top of his suspect list. He typed back, "Change tomorrow's morning meeting time. Tell only Kiana, see if the change leaks. We'll start narrowing the suspect pool." The game had begun. Someone in Lilia's inner circle wanted her dead, and Seth had 5 days to identify them before his daughter became collateral damage in a corporate war he'd tried to leave behind. He looked at Clara, focused intently on solving for X in her algebra problems, completely unaware that her father was solving for a different variable entirely. Who could be trusted? And who was playing both sides in a game where the stakes were measured in lives rather than market share? Thursday morning brought rain, the kind of steady downpour that turned the city gray and made everyone irritable. Seth dropped Clara at school with extra instructions to text him when she arrived home with Mrs. Patterson, then drove to Helix Tower with senses heightened by the message from the previous night. Edith Walsh accessing Lilia's private schedule outside business hours was a red flag, but not conclusive evidence. Seth needed more data points, patterns that would reveal whether the CFO was actively hostile or simply doing her job with unfortunate timing. The test came at 9:15, when Lilia's 9:30 meeting with the marketing department was suddenly rescheduled to 10 USDAS. Lilia had told only Kiana about the change, framing it as a scheduling conflict. If the change leaked to anyone outside the immediate executive team, it would confirm they had an information breach. Seth positioned himself in the maintenance closet across from the executive conference room, door slightly ajar, watching the hallway through the gap. At 9:25, the marketing team arrived as originally scheduled, looking confused when they found the conference room empty. At 9:35, Edith Walsh appeared, moving with purposeful stride toward Lilia's office. Seth couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched through the glass walls as Edith spoke briefly with Kiana, her expression concerned. Kiana made a phone call, then shook her head. Edith left, still looking troubled. Innocent concern from a dedicated CFO, or something more calculated? The answer came at 9:50, when Seth noticed Edith making a call from her own office, her body language animated, gesturing as she spoke. The call lasted 3 minutes. Immediately afterward, she accessed her computer, typing rapidly. Seth made a note of the exact time. If he could access phone records and computer logs, he might be able to trace where that information went. The rescheduled meeting proceeded normally at 10 SCO. Lilia presented quarterly marketing projections with her usual confident precision, while Seth stood near the rear exit, scanning faces and monitoring the room. Everything seemed routine until he noticed one of the marketing managers, a younger man named Parker Drake. checking his phone repeatedly despite the no devices policy for executive meetings. Seth moved closer, angling to see the screen. Parker was texting someone. Short messages that he deleted immediately after sending. The behavior was suspicious enough that Seth made another mental note. After the meeting concluded, Seth followed Parker discreetly as the manager returned to his office on the 5th floor. Parker made 2 phone calls, both brief, then left the building through the main lobby. Seth had a decision to make: follow Parker and potentially leave Lilia exposed, or maintain his primary responsibility and investigate Parker later. The decision was easy. Lilia's safety came first. He returned to the executive floor and found Lilia in her office, reviewing contracts with the focused intensity that had built her company. When she noticed Seth in the doorway, she set aside the documents. "Anything?" "Edith made a call immediately after discovering your meeting time changed. Parker Drake from marketing was texting during your presentation, deleting messages as he sent them. I need access to your phone records and computer logs to trace where information is flowing." Lilia's expression tightened. Parker's been with TitanCore for 3 years. Solid performance, no disciplinary issues. I can't believe he'd be involved in something like this. People surprise you when the right pressure or incentive appears. I'll need IT access to investigate properly, which means bringing someone else into the circle of trust. Who's your most reliable tech person? Jackson Sullivan, head of IT security, former network specialist, completely paranoid about data breaches. If there's information leaking, he'll find it. Lilia picked up her phone. I'll have him meet us in the server room in 20 minutes. The server room was in the basement, a climate-controlled facility that hummed with the sound of cooling systems and hard drives. Jackson was already waiting when they arrived. A thin man in his 40s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Chambers said you need forensic analysis, Jackson said without preamble. What are we looking for? Seth explained the situation without revealing too much about the assassination attempt, framing it as a corporate espionage investigation. Jackson listened intently, his fingers already moving across his laptop keyboard. Give me names and time frames. I can pull phone logs, email records, network access patterns. Everything digital leaves fingerprints. Over the next hour, Jackson worked with frightening efficiency, pulling data that painted a disturbing picture. Edith Walsh had made 17 calls to an encrypted number over the past 2 weeks, always outside business hours. Parker Drake had been accessing confidential files he had no business viewing, including Lilia's personal schedule and security protocols. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Kiana Ford, Lilia's trusted assistant, had been forwarding calendar information to an external email address, carefully routed through proxy servers that suggested deliberate concealment. Lilia's face went pale as Jackson displayed the evidence. Kiana? She's been with me since I started TitanCore. She knows everything about my life, my schedule, my family. I trusted her completely. When did the forwarding start? Seth asked Jackson. The IT specialist checked timestamps. 3 weeks ago, right after a substantial deposit appeared in an offshore account linked to her personal information. Someone paid her $50,000, with promises of more after successful completion of an unspecified task. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Kiana had provided the intelligence for the parking garage attack. When that failed, she'd continued feeding information, waiting for another opportunity. Edith's calls and Parker's snooping might be separate issues, corporate politics and personal ambition. But Kiana was the real threat. We need to confront her, Lilia said, anger replacing shock in her voice. Seth shook his head. Not yet. If we tip our hand, whoever hired her will know we're investigating. We need to identify the person behind this, not just the informant. So what do we do? We use Kiana the same way she's been used against you. Feed her false information, see who acts on it, follow the chain back to the source. Jackson leaned back in his chair, a grim smile touching his lips. I can monitor all her communications in real time. Any email, text, or call she makes gets flagged immediately. We'll know who she's reporting to within hours. The plan was risky but necessary. Lilia would tell Kiana about a fabricated evening event, a private dinner with a potential investor at a restaurant across town. The information would be specific enough to act on, but controlled enough to spring a trap. They returned to the executive floor, where Kiana sat at her desk, looking as professional and trustworthy as ever. Seth watched as Lilia approached, maintaining her usual composed demeanor while delivering the false information about tonight's dinner plans. Kiana made notes, confirmed the reservation time, offered to arrange the car service. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Seth felt a cold anger building as he watched the performance, knowing this woman had facilitated an attempt on Lilia's life while maintaining this facade of loyal service. After Lilia returned to her office, Seth remained in the hallway, apparently adjusting a ceiling light fixture while actually monitoring Kiana's movements. Within 5 minutes, she excused herself for a bathroom break, phone in hand. Jackson's text arrived 30 seconds later. She just sent an encrypted message, working on decryption now. Seth moved closer to the bathroom hallway, positioning himself where he could intervene if necessary. His instincts were screaming that something was wrong, that they'd pushed too hard, too fast. The bathroom door opened. Kiana emerged, her expression different now. The professional mask had slipped, replaced by something calculating and cold. Her eyes met Seth's across the corridor, and he saw recognition flash in her expression. She knew they were onto her. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. Kiana's hand moved toward her purse, reaching inside with deliberate intent. Seth was already moving, closing the distance between them with speed that surprised even him. His hand caught her wrist before she could withdraw whatever she was reaching for, his other hand securing her purse. Inside was a small pistol, compact and deadly. "Let go of me," Kiana hissed, struggling against his grip. "You have no right to search my personal belongings." Seth maintained his hold, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "You brought a weapon into a corporate office. That gives me every right. Security is on their way." Other employees had emerged from offices, drawn by the commotion. Lilia appeared in her doorway, her face registering shock and betrayal as she saw her trusted assistant being restrained by Seth. "Get your hands off me," Kiana demanded, her voice rising. "I'll sue you, the company, everyone. This is assault." "This is self-defense," Seth corrected. "You were reaching for a weapon in a building where your employer works. Immediately after we discovered you've been selling confidential information to unknown parties. I'd say that constitutes reasonable suspicion of immediate threat." Security arrived, followed quickly by building security and then police. As officers took Kiana into custody, she maintained her innocence, claiming the gun was for personal protection, that Seth had assaulted her without cause, that this was all a misunderstanding. But Jackson's decrypted message told a different story. Kiana had sent a single text. "Target confirmed for 7 p.m., Riverside Bistro, minimal security." The trap had worked. Somewhere in the city, someone was preparing for another attempt on Lilia's life. expecting her to appear at a restaurant she had no intention of visiting. As police led Kiana away, still protesting her innocence, Lilia turned to Seth with an expression that mixed gratitude, horror, and exhaustion. "She was going to kill me herself," Lilia said quietly. "Right here, in the office. If you hadn't stopped her." "But I did," Seth interrupted. "And now we have leverage. Kiana will talk eventually. Give up whoever hired her to avoid longer prison time. This is almost over." Almost. The word hung between them, a reminder that identifying Kiana didn't eliminate the threat, merely exposed one layer of a deeper conspiracy. That evening, as Seth picked up Clara from school and drove home through rain-slick streets, his phone buzzed with a message from Jackson. Traced Kiana's payments. Source is a shell corporation owned by someone named Victor Ashland. Mean anything to you? Seth pulled over, staring at the name. Victor Ashland. It meant nothing to him personally, but a quick search revealed he was a corporate raider, known for hostile takeovers and asset stripping. Someone who would profit enormously from Lilia's death and the resulting chaos at Titan Core. The endgame was in sight. But first, Seth needed to ensure Clara was safe, because Victor Ashland's next move would likely target anyone close to Lilia, including the janitor who kept interfering with his plans. As he resumed driving, Clara looked up from her book. "Dad, you look worried. Is everything okay?" Seth managed a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just work complications." But as they pulled into their apartment complex, Seth noticed a car that didn't belong, parked with a clear view of their building entrance. Professional surveillance, waiting and watching. The game had escalated, and Seth's simple life was about to become very complicated indeed. Seth didn't go directly to their apartment. Instead, he drove past their building, watching the suspicious vehicle in his rearview mirror. The car didn't follow, which meant they were stationary surveillance, not active pursuit. Information gathering rather than immediate threat. Still dangerous, but manageable. Change of plans, Seth told Clara, keeping his voice casual. "We're going to have dinner at Mrs. Patterson's tonight. Her niece is visiting, and she thought you might like to meet her." Clara looked skeptical. Mrs. Patterson's niece was a fabrication, but his daughter didn't question the sudden change. She'd learned over the past few days to trust his judgment when his tone shifted to this particular register. Mrs. Patterson lived 3 blocks away in a secured building with doorman service. Seth had cultivated the relationship specifically because her apartment represented a safe fallback location if their own home became compromised. He'd never expected to use it this soon. After settling Clara with Mrs. Patterson and her very real niece, who happened to be visiting from Portland, Seth returned to his car and made a series of calls. First to Jackson, requesting surveillance camera footage from his apartment building. Then to Lilia, informing her of the development. "They're watching your home?" Lilia's voice carried immediate concern. "Seth, you need to take Clara and leave the city. I'll arrange." "Running makes us targets," Seth interrupted. "Scared, vulnerable, easier to track. We stay, but we adapt. I need to know everything about Victor Ashland. His business, his methods, where he operates from. He's based in the financial district, Ashland Capital on the 40th floor of Meridian Tower. Ruthless, brilliant, completely amoral. He's attempted 3 hostile takeovers of Titan Core over the past 2 years, failed each time because our board wouldn't sell and our shareholders stayed loyal. Seth processed this information, patterns forming in his mind. So killing you destabilizes the company, creates panic, makes shareholders vulnerable to a buyout offer. Exactly. With me gone, The board splinters into factions, share prices plummet, and Ashland swoops in to acquire Titan Core for pennies on the dollar. He profits billions while destroying everything I've built. The motive was clear now. A purely financial calculation where Lilia's life was merely an obstacle to overcome. Seth had dealt with this mentality before. Corporate psychopaths who viewed human beings as variables. In profit equations, the surveillance team outside my apartment means Ashland knows I'm protecting you. Seth said, thinking through implications. He's gathering intelligence on me, looking for pressure points. Clara is the obvious target. Then we protect her. I'll hire private security, move her somewhere safe. No. Professional security means paper trails, predictable patterns, more variables to control. Clara stays with Mrs. Patterson for now, and I handle Ashland directly. There was silence on the line. When Lilia spoke again, her voice was careful. What does handle directly mean? Seth stared through his windshield at the rain, watching water stream down the glass in patterns that reminded him of things he'd tried to forget. It means I visit Victor Ashland and explain that continuing his current course of action would be inadvisable for his health and business interests. That sounds like a threat. It's a negotiation. Ashland responds to power and self-interest. I demonstrate the first, appeal to the second, and hopefully we resolve this without further violence. And if he doesn't respond to your negotiation? Seth's silence answered the question more eloquently than words could. After a moment, Lilia continued, her tone shifting from concerned to decisive. Then I'm coming with you. This is my company, my life he's threatening. I won't hide while someone else fights my battles. Ms. Chambers. Lilia. We're past formality, Seth. And I'm serious. You've spent the past week protecting me, investigating threats, risking your safety for mine. The least I can do is stand beside you when confronting the person behind all this. Seth recognized the determination in her voice. He'd heard it before in combat, the moment when someone decided they'd rather die standing than live cowering. Arguing would be pointless. Fine, but we do this my way, following my protocols. Ashland doesn't get to dictate terms. They arranged to meet at Meridian Tower at 8 p.m., after normal business hours when Ashland would be working late, as men like him always did. Seth spent the intervening hours checking on Clara, who was enjoying Mrs. Patterson's hospitality with genuine delight. Then preparing for the confrontation ahead. He changed from his maintenance coveralls into clothes he hadn't worn in years. Dark pants and a fitted black jacket that allowed freedom of movement. Not threatening, but not submissive either. The outfit of someone who understood violence, but didn't lead with it. Lilia met him in the Meridian Tower lobby, dressed in a charcoal business suit that projected authority and confidence. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, recognizing immediately that he looked different outside the gray coveralls. You clean up well, she said with a slight smile. So do you. Ready for this? Lilia's expression hardened. I've been negotiating with corporate predators since I was 25. Victor Ashland is just another ambitious man who thinks he can intimidate me into submission. He's about to learn otherwise. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent, both of them preparing mentally for the confrontation ahead. Seth used the time to review his approach, the balance between threat and diplomacy, that might convince Ashland to back down without forcing escalation. Ashland Capital's reception area was all glass and steel, minimalist design that screamed expensive taste. The receptionist had left for the day, but lights blazed in the corner office where Victor Ashland worked late, exactly as Seth had anticipated. They walked directly to his door without knocking. Ashland looked up from his computer, surprise flashing across his handsome features before settling into calculated curiosity. He was younger than Seth expected, early 40s, with the kind of polished appearance that came from personal trainers and expensive grooming. "Miss Chambers, what an unexpected pleasure," Ashland said, rising from his desk with practiced charm. "And you've brought your janitor. How delightfully proletarian." Lilia's voice was ice when she responded. "We know you hired the men who attacked me. We know you paid Kiana Ford to provide intelligence. We know you're behind the attempted assassination." Ashland's smile didn't waver. "Those are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" "Enough to interest the police and the SEC," Seth said, stepping forward. "Financial records linking you to shell corporations that paid for the attacks. Digital evidence of coordination and planning. Witness testimony from your hired informant." "Ah, the janitor speaks," Ashland said, his tone mocking. "And with such authority. Tell me, Mr. Newman, is it? What exactly do you think gives you standing to threaten me in my own office?" Seth held his gaze, letting silence stretch uncomfortably. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried weight that made Ashland's confident expression flicker. "I'm giving you an opportunity that men like you rarely receive. The chance to walk away from a profitable but ultimately fatal mistake. Your assassination attempts failed. Your informant is in police custody. Your surveillance team outside my apartment has been photographed and documented. You have lost, Mr. Ashland. The only question is whether you accept defeat gracefully or force consequences neither of us wants." Ashland's charm evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. "You're bluffing. If you had actionable evidence, police would be here instead of you. This is desperation, a weak attempt at intimidation." Lilia pulled out her phone, displaying a document. "This is a sealed complaint to the SEC detailing your involvement in corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and securities fraud. It's currently sitting with a federal judge, scheduled for unsealing Monday morning unless I personally intervene to stop it." She stepped closer to Ashland's desk, her presence commanding despite his height advantage. "You wanted Titan Core. You tried to take it through violence and manipulation. You failed. Now you have a choice. Walk away, abandon your takeover attempts, and I'll make this complaint disappear. Continue your current path, and I'll ensure you spend the next decade fighting federal charges while your reputation and business crumble." The offer hung in the air between them, a lifeline disguised as a threat. Ashland's eyes moved between Lilia and Seth, calculating odds and outcomes with the same ruthless efficiency that had built his fortune. "And what guarantee do I have that you won't file charges anyway once I back down?" he asked. "My word," Lilia said simply. "I'm offering you exactly what you refused to offer me. The chance to walk away with your life and freedom intact. The difference is, I actually honor my commitments." Seth watched the calculation play across Ashland's face. Men like him operated on self-interest and risk assessment. Lilia had just demonstrated that continuing his current path carried more risk than potential reward. After a long silence, Ashland's shoulders dropped fractionally, a subtle surrender. "You've made your point, Miss Chambers. Consider my interest in Titan Core permanently withdrawn." "In writing," Seth added. "Signed statement delivered to Ms. Chambers' attorney by tomorrow morning, witnessed and notarized." Ashland's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Agreed." As they left his office, Seth remained vigilant, aware that cornered predators sometimes lashed out despite agreements. But the elevator doors closed without incident, and they descended 40 floors in silence. Only when they reached the lobby did Lilia finally exhale, tension draining from her shoulders. Do you think he'll honor the agreement? Yes. Men like Ashland respect power and consequence. We demonstrated both tonight. He'll move on to easier targets, companies without protectors willing to confront him directly. They walked out into the rain, standing under the building's awning as water poured from the night sky. Lilia turned to Seth, her expression complex. This is where you tell me your week is up, that you're returning to your simple life, isn't it? Seth considered the question, thinking of Clara waiting at Mrs. Patterson's apartment, of the gray coveralls hanging in his locker, of the carefully constructed invisibility he'd cultivated for 4 years. That was the agreement, he said carefully. And if I asked you to stay? Not as hired security, but as someone I trust. Someone who sees me as a person rather than just a CEO to be protected or exploited. The offer carried implications far beyond professional arrangement. Seth recognized the vulnerability in her eyes, the loneliness that came from operating in a world where everyone wanted something from you. I have a daughter who needs stability, he finally said. A life I built specifically to avoid the complications that come with your world. I know. And I'm not asking you to abandon Clara or compromise her. Safety. I'm asking if there might be room in your stable, simple life for something more. Lilia paused, then added, You showed up when I needed someone. Let me return the favor. Clara deserves more than just survival. She deserves opportunity, resources, a future not limited by the same constraints that drove you to clean floors despite your capabilities. Seth started to object, pride bristling at the implicit charity. Lilia raised a hand, stopping him. Not a handout, an investment, in both of you. You've proven yourself invaluable this week, not just as protection, but as someone who understands strategy and threat assessment. Titan Core needs that expertise permanently. And perhaps you need a purpose beyond pushing a broom. The rain continued falling, each drop carrying away pieces of the careful walls Seth had built around his life. He thought of Clara, brilliant and ambitious, limited by the choices he'd made after tragedy struck. He thought of Isabella, who'd always said helping scared people was what made him special. One condition, Seth said finally. Clara comes first, always. If there's ever a choice between her safety and your business interests, I choose her without hesitation. Lilia's smile was genuine, transforming her face from corporate authority to human warmth. I wouldn't trust you if you said anything else. That's exactly why I want you here. They stood in the rain, an unlikely partnership forged through crisis and trust. While somewhere in the city, Clara practiced violin and Victor Ashland signed away his ambitions, and the simple life Seth had built began transforming into something far more complex and infinitely more promising. The following week brought a new rhythm to Seth's life. His official title became Director of Security Operations, a position that allowed him to maintain Titan Core's protective protocols while actually spending time with his daughter. The gray coveralls were retired, replaced by professional attire that felt strange after 4 years of invisibility. Clara adjusted to the change with remarkable ease. The scholarship Lilia quietly arranged for Westbridge Academy eliminated the financial strain that had kept Seth awake at night. When he tried to refuse, Lilia had been blunt. Your daughter is brilliant. Titan Core invests in brilliant people. Consider it a signing bonus. Evenings took on new patterns. Sometimes Lilia would join them for dinner at their apartment, bringing takeout and genuinely terrible jokes that made Clara laugh. She'd ask about violin practice and chemistry projects with real interest, never condescending, treating Clara as an intelligent person rather than someone to be humored. One Thursday evening, 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Lilia arrived looking exhausted. A board meeting had gone badly, with several members questioning her aggressive expansion strategy. Seth recognized the weight she carried, the isolation that came with being the youngest person in rooms, full of men who resented her success. After Clara went to bed, they sat on the small balcony of Seth's apartment, drinking coffee and watching the city lights. "Tell me about your wife," Lilia said suddenly. "If you're comfortable. I see her picture on Clara's nightstand, and she was clearly remarkable to have raised such an incredible young woman." Seth was quiet for a long moment, surprised by how naturally the words came. Isabella was a financial consultant. Brilliant with numbers, terrible at cooking, obsessed with terrible sci-fi movies. She saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. How did she die? Aneurysm. Sudden, no warning. One moment she was laughing in our kitchen, the next she was gone. Clara was 3. Lilia's hand found his in the darkness, a simple gesture of comfort. I can't imagine that kind of loss. Losing someone and having to stay strong for a young person who needs you. You learn to carry it, Seth said. The grief becomes part of you, not lighter exactly, but more familiar. Clara keeps me grounded. She's the reason I left my old life, the reason I get up every morning. What was your old life? You've never fully explained. Seth had known this conversation would come eventually. Executive protection. Private security firm called Sentinel Group. I was good at it, maybe too good. Kept people alive who had enemies willing to kill them. Then a mission went wrong. People died who shouldn't have. And I realized I couldn't do that work and be the father Clara needed. So you became invisible, Lilia said, understanding in her voice. Hid your capabilities behind a broom handle and gray coveralls. It was safer that way, for both of us. Lilia was quiet, then shared something she'd never told anyone. My parents were academics, brilliant, distant, emotionally unavailable. Success was the only currency they valued. I built Titan Core partially to prove I could, partially hoping they'd finally be proud. They died in a car accident before I made my first million. Never got to see what I became. Seth heard the pain beneath her words, the particular loneliness of achieving everything while the people you wanted to impress were gone. They would have been proud, even if they never learned how to show it. Maybe. Or maybe they'd find something to criticize, some way I wasn't measuring up. That's the thing about absent approval. You never stop chasing it. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd built walls against pain, discovering that shared vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. When Lilia finally left that night, Seth realized something had shifted between them. Professional respect had evolved into genuine friendship, perhaps something deeper neither was quite ready to name. Inside, he checked on Clara, who was supposedly sleeping but clearly had been reading under her covers. I like her, Clara said, putting down her book. Lilia. She treats you like you matter, not just like you. Work for her. Seth smiled, kissing his daughter's forehead. She treats everyone like they matter. That's what makes her different. As he returned to his own room, Seth thought about the walls he'd built around his life, the careful invisibility that had kept him safe but also isolated. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe trust didn't have to be a vulnerability that got people killed. Maybe, with the right people, it could be the foundation of something stronger than any wall he could construct alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in years, Seth felt something other than simple survival. He felt hope. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning, hidden in routine financial audits that Jackson conducted as part of enhanced security protocols. He appeared in Seth's office, his expression grave. "We have a problem, a big one." Seth looked up from security reports, immediately alert. "What did you find?" Jackson spread printouts across the desk, highlighting transactions that formed a disturbing pattern. Someone's been skimming from Titan Core's operating accounts. Small amounts, carefully disguised as legitimate expenses, routed through subsidiary accounts. 50,000 here, 70,000 there. Over 18 months, they've stolen nearly $2 million. "Ashland?" Seth asked, though the timeline didn't match. "No. This started long before Ashland's assassination attempts. This is internal, someone with deep access to financial systems and authorization protocols. Someone who knows our security well enough to hide their tracks." Seth studied the documents, his analytical mind processing patterns. "Who has this level of access?" "That's the problem. Only 4 people. Lilia, Edith Walsh, the CFO, our head of accounting, and our chief legal counsel, Hunter Tate." The name sent a chill through Seth. Hunter Tate had been instrumental in drafting the sealed complaint against Ashland, had access to all of Lilia's confidential information, attended every major strategic meeting. If he was corrupt, the damage could be catastrophic. "Show me the evidence connecting him specifically." Over the next hour, Jackson traced digital fingerprints that pointed unmistakably toward Hunter. Authorization codes used during his work hours, IP addresses from his computer, transactions that coincided with his presence in the building. The case was circumstantial but compelling. "We need to tell Lilia," Seth said, already dreading the conversation. They found her in the executive conference room, presenting quarterly projections to the board. Seth waited until the meeting concluded, then asked for a private moment. Hunter was with her, discussing legal implications of the expansion strategy. "Can this wait?" Lilia asked, noting Seth's serious expression. "Hunter and I have a call with regulators in 20 minutes. Seth glanced at Hunter, who smiled pleasantly, completely at ease. "It's urgent. Private." Understanding flickered in Lilia's eyes. "Hunter, give us a moment." The attorney looked between them, his smile faltering slightly. "Of course. I'll prepare the briefing documents." After he left, Seth closed the conference room door and shared Jackson's findings. He watched Lilia's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to carefully controlled fury. Hunter has been with Titan Core since the beginning. He helped structure our first major acquisition, defended us against 3 separate lawsuits. I trust him completely. "The evidence is substantial," Jackson said quietly, displaying transaction records on his tablet. "These aren't mistakes or coincidences. This is systematic theft by someone who knows our systems intimately." Lilia studied the documents, her brilliant mind processing implications. If Hunter is corrupt, he has access to everything. Our expansion plans, merger negotiations, legal strategies. He could have been feeding information to competitors for months. "Or planning something bigger," Seth added. $2 million is seed money for someone with expensive ambitions. The question is what he's planning to do with it. As if summoned by their conversation, Hunter appeared in the doorway, his pleasant expression replaced by something harder. In his hand was a folder that he placed on the conference table. "I believe this conversation concerns me," he said calmly. "I'm disappointed you didn't approach me directly, Lilia. We could have handled this more discreetly." "You're admitting the embezzlement?" Lilia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Hunter's smile was cold now, calculating. Embezzlement is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as claiming fair compensation for the value I've provided this company. Your success wouldn't exist without my legal expertise, yet you pay me a fraction of what you're worth. Seth moved slightly, positioning himself between Hunter and Lilia. That doesn't justify theft, doesn't it? I've watched Lilia build an empire while treating the rest of us as replaceable parts. Well, I'm not replaceable, and I'm tired of being undervalued. Hunter opened his folder, revealing documents. These are copies of every confidential strategy, every proprietary technology, every competitive advantage Titan Core possesses. Tomorrow morning, they go to our 3 largest competitors unless certain conditions are met. The room fell silent. Hunter had just transformed from trusted counsel to existential threat, holding a knife to everything Lilia had built. What conditions? Lilia asked, her voice controlled despite the betrayal cutting through her. Hunter's smile widened. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office. Come alone and we'll discuss terms. Bring your security consultant, and I start distributing documents immediately. He left before anyone could respond, leaving behind the shattered trust and the ticking clock of his ultimatum. The debate was immediate and heated. Lilia wanted to confront Hunter with police backup and federal authorities. Seth argued for a more measured approach, knowing desperate men made unpredictable choices when cornered. If he feels threatened, he'll release everything out of spite, Seth explained. We need to understand his endgame before we act. His endgame is destroying my company and getting rich doing it. Lilia shot back, her fury barely contained. Clara's voice interrupted from the doorway, unexpected and clear. Then give him what he thinks he wants. They all turned. Clara stood in her school uniform, having been brought to the office by Mrs. Patterson when school ended early for teacher conferences. Her expression was thoughtful, analytical. Sweetheart, this is adult business, Seth started. You taught me that the best way to beat someone in chess is to let them think they're winning until they overcommit. Clara continued, ignoring the dismissal. This Hunter person wants money and recognition, right? So give him a deal that seems perfect, but actually traps him. The simple strategy, delivered with 12-year-old clarity, crystallized Seth's thinking. She's right. We go to the meeting. Let Hunter reveal his full demands, then use his overconfidence against him. Lilia considered this, her strategic mind engaging. If he thinks he's won, he'll get sloppy. Show us everything he has, maybe reveal accomplices. Jackson added, I can set up surveillance in Hunter's office, record everything. Legal consent isn't needed if we're documenting a crime in progress. The plan formed quickly. Seth would accompany Lilia despite Hunter's demands, but remain hidden nearby. Jackson would monitor audio feeds. If things escalated, building security was positioned to respond within seconds. That night, Seth explained the situation to Clara in terms she could understand without frightening her. Tomorrow might be complicated. You'll stay with Mrs. Patterson, and I need you to promise you'll follow her instructions exactly. Clara's expression was serious beyond her years. Are you going to be safe? I'm always safe. That's my job. That's not what I asked. Seth pulled his daughter close, feeling the weight of promises he couldn't guarantee. I'll do everything possible to come home to you. That's the best I can offer. The next morning arrived too quickly. Seth and Lilia drove to Titan Core in tense silence, each processing the confrontation ahead. Hunter's office was on the 8th floor, a corner space with windows overlooking the financial district. They arrived at 9:55. Seth positioned himself in an empty office across the hall, door cracked, listening through the wireless audio feed Jackson had established. Lilia knocked on Hunter's door precisely at 10:00. Lilia, right on time. Hunter's voice came through clearly. And alone, as requested. Smart choice. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want? Direct as always. I want what I've earned. 50% ownership of Titan Core, retroactive to our founding. Plus $10 million as compensation for years of undervaluation. Lilia's laugh was bitter. You're insane. The board would never approve that transfer. They will, when I explain that refusing means every competitor gets our proprietary technology, our expansion plans, our strategic acquisitions list. Titan Core becomes worthless overnight, and you become the CEO who destroyed shareholder value through stubborn pride. Seth listened to the exchange, waiting for Hunter to reveal more. The attorney was confident, arrogant, exactly where they needed him. I built this company, Lilia said, her voice hard. You wrote contracts and reviewed documents, important work but not worth 50%. Without my legal expertise, you'd have been sued into bankruptcy 5 times over. I've saved Titan Core more than you'll ever acknowledge. And stolen $2 million in the process. Hunter's pause was telling. You found that? Impressive. Jackson's better than I gave him credit for. So, you admit the embezzlement. Embezzlement implies I took something that wasn't mine. I took what I was owed. Seth heard the admission clearly, as did Jackson, recording every word. But they needed more. Needed Hunter to reveal if he had accomplices, if there were other threats. Lilia pressed forward. Fine. Let's say I agree to your demands. How do I know you won't just take the money and release the documents anyway? Because I'm not stupid. Once I own 50% of Titan Core, destroying it hurts me as much as you. We become partners, whether you like it or not. And if I refuse? Hunter's voice turned cold. Then by noon today, every major competitor receives a very interesting package. Your company collapses, your reputation is destroyed, and I disappear with my $2 million to a country with no extradition treaty. You lose everything either way, Lilia. This way, at least you maintain some dignity. The ultimatum hung in the air. Through his earpiece, Seth heard Jackson confirm they had enough recorded evidence for prosecution. The trap was set. Lilia played her final card. I need time to consider. You have until noon, not a minute longer. As Lilia left Hunter's office, Seth saw the attorney's satisfied smile through the crack in the door. Hunter thought he'd won. He was about to learn otherwise. The end came swiftly, orchestrated with precision that would have made Seth's former Sentinel colleagues proud. At 11:30 a.m., federal agents entered Titan Core with warrants for Hunter Tate's arrest. The evidence Jackson had compiled, combined with recorded admissions from that morning's meeting, painted an irrefutable picture of embezzlement, extortion, and corporate espionage. Hunter's confident smile evaporated as agents handcuffed him in his corner office, reading rights while confiscating his computer and files. The proprietary documents he'd threatened to release were recovered. His escape plan to a non-extradition country documented through email records he'd been careless enough to leave unencrypted. You can't do this, Hunter protested as agents led him through the executive floor. Lilia, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Lilia watched from her office doorway, her expression unreadable. The only misunderstanding was mine. Trusting you, believing your loyalty matched your capability. That mistake ends today. As federal agents escorted Hunter from the building, Lilia returned to her office where Seth waited. They stood in silence for a long moment, processing the betrayal and its resolution. I should have seen it sooner, Lilia finally said. The signs were there. His resentment, his comments about compensation, his increasing distance from the team. Betrayal is hard to see when you're choosing to trust someone, Seth replied. You wanted to believe in him. That's not weakness. That's leadership. Leadership that nearly cost me everything I built. Seth moved closer, his voice gentle. But it didn't. You adapted, confronted the threat, and protected what matters. That's also leadership. Lilia smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional mask. We protected what matters. I couldn't have done this without you. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Before either could address it, Seth's phone buzzed. A text from Clara. Mrs. Patterson says it's over. You're safe. Coming home for celebration dinner? Seth showed Lilia the message. My daughter wants to celebrate. You should join us. I'd like that. But first, I have something for you. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a document, official and notarized. Seth scanned the contents, his expression shifting from confusion to surprise. This is a partnership agreement, 20% ownership of Titan Core. You've earned it, more than Hunter ever did, more than most of my board. You saved my life, protected my company, trusted me enough to let me fight my own battles. That's worth far more than a salary. Seth started to protest, old instincts about accepting charity rising immediately. Lilia raised her hand, stopping him. This isn't charity. It's recognition of value. Clara deserves a future not limited by circumstances beyond her control. You deserve to stop apologizing for capabilities that make you exceptional. And I deserve a partner who sees me as a person, not just a CEO to protect or exploit. The word partner carried implications beyond business. Seth recognized the offer for what it truly was. An invitation into a life more complex and promising than gray coveralls and simple invisibility. One condition, he said, echoing their first agreement. Clara comes first, always. Lilia's smile was radiant. I wouldn't trust you if you said anything else. That evening, they gathered in Seth's modest apartment for what Clara insisted on calling a victory celebration. Mrs. Patterson brought dessert, Jackson arrived with takeout from Clara's favorite restaurant, and for a few hours, the small space filled with laughter and normalcy. Later, after guests departed and Clara was tucked into bed, Seth and Lilia stood on the small balcony, watching city lights beneath the night sky. What happens now? Lilia asked. Now we move forward, together, building something neither of us could create alone. It wasn't a declaration of romance, not yet. But it was acknowledgement of connection, of trust earned through crisis, of two people choosing to show up for each other despite complicated pasts and uncertain futures. Inside, Clara's light clicked off, the rhythm of her breathing settling into sleep. Seth thought about Isabella, about the life they'd built before tragedy struck. She would have liked Lilia, he realized, would have appreciated her strength, her intelligence, her genuine care for Clara. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the past's lessons while refusing to let them define every choice. Thank you, Seth said quietly, for seeing beyond the janitor, for trusting me with your life, for showing up. Lilia's hand found his in the darkness. Thank you for doing the same. They stood together under the stars, two people who'd learned that walls built against pain could also block connection, that true strength sometimes meant choosing vulnerability, and that the most important battles were fought not with violence, but with the courage to trust again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, They had something neither had possessed in years. Hope, partnership, and the promise that showing up for each other was enough. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.